It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both President Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good afternoon, all. Al, the country heard President Biden yesterday declare that the Afghanistan war was over after the last U.S. troops left Kabul on August 31st. Americans seem to me to be still trying to sort out their feelings about this withdrawal and how this administration managed it. Have you reached your own conclusion about Biden as commander-in-chief and his lead during this crisis and what this retreat might mean for American foreign policy and these kind of engagements in the future?
Well, first of all, I'm not an expert on foreign policy, and it's still, even though the deadline's passed pretty soon to make any hard and fast judgments. But with those caveats, what I'd say about Biden, when I think about how he handled this, there's a word that comes to mind, and it's steadfast. You know, he's been against continuing this war for the last decade. He believed that we went to war in Afghanistan to rout out terrorism and Al Qaeda, and that we basically achieved that when we killed bin Laden. And he was opposed to shifting the mission to nation building. I think he's always been very skeptical that we could create a democracy in our own image in a country that's really been governed historically by tribal leaders. You know, as vice president, he opposed the war. As a candidate, he said he was going to get us out. And yesterday, he ended what he called a forever war. It's exactly what he promised. So he's come in for a lot of harsh criticism, obviously, because the early part of the withdrawal was pretty chaotic. But he's regrouped. We got 120,000 people out. It was not without paying a big price in the terrorist incident that killed 13 American servicemen and women and about 90 Afghans. And I'm sure that's going to rest very heavily on Joe Biden's heart for a long time. But I think in the end, most Americans are going to support his decision to get out. And though there's no doubt that, at least in the interim, those images of a messy withdrawal have driven his approval numbers down, I suspect that those images are going to fade, and that Afghanistan won't really be much on Americans' minds a year from now when they get ready to go to the polls. Through it all, most important, I think Americans saw a president who was steadfast, who showed strength, who showed strength of conviction. Over time, those qualities usually serve a president well. And Biden's going to need them because he's got a lot to tackle over the next month or two with COVID and the infrastructure bill and the budget and the debt ceiling and a whole bunch of other domestic challenges. He's going to go down on Friday to Louisiana. And my guess is that, as George Bush learned, how he handles Hurricane Ida may be one of the most important things that determines what people think about him. And with that kind of devastation, it's hard for anybody to do a really good job. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, you know, the Republicans, of course, are going to continue to attack him for Afghanistan. Frankly, I think they sound like a bunch of idiots. I mean, they're attacking him for not backing down and reversing the position President Trump had when he surrendered to the Taliban and when they were being lapdogs to him for a year. Even Ann Coulter responded to Trump's criticism of Biden by reminding him of all the tweets he had urging the troops to come home. In a speech on Tuesday, President Biden explained what I suspect the long-term implications on American foreign policy will be. He said, in a sense, this decision was about ending an era of major military operations to remake countries. We're going to still go after terrorists. We did it last week. We'll continue to do that. We did it again this week. But with an understanding that terrorism now is more spread out, comes from a lot of different places, and then we have new technologies and better ways to combat it than putting troops on the ground, trying to remake countries that aren't very much like us. I suspect that'll be the big lesson of Afghanistan. And as future threats emerge, we'll get an idea whether we learned it or not.
Craig, a couple of weeks ago when we first started talking about this, you were very much in the camp of let's hold our judgment. And now we're at the end of at least the proper phrase of this withdrawal. Have you made up your mind about President Biden's leadership here?
I think I agree with it. It's still a little too early to really judge this. Historians are going to take a careful look over time and make a decision. I know that it didn't go as well as the Biden administration would like us to think it went, and it certainly wasn't the fiasco that some on the Republican side are suggesting. The truth is that, as I also said last time, that this is a very violent place in Afghanistan, and it would be very hard to believe that the outcome of our exiting the country was ever going to go smoothly. And the tragic loss of life is certainly a reminder of that. People will speculate as to whether it could have been prevented. When you think of just the sheer numbers of people airlifted out over a short period of time, it's remarkable. And so my thoughts now are more for where we go forward. I do think that one of the realities in American politics is that we were stuck in this place for 20 years with accomplishments having been made over 20 years, but what is really going to remain in the minds of most people is the last 20 days. And it seems unfair. Many will give Biden credit, and he deserves it, for finally finding a way to get us out of there and thus to save American lives by not being present. But others are going to find the withdrawal unsatisfactory. I think one of the most important things for the Biden administration to do is to remain absolutely clear about what the facts are and what happened, because in some ways, I think the greatest risk would be to somehow obfuscate, what they knew, or not be completely candid with what exactly happened. And there's plenty of stories that are going to be told, and a lot of inquiries, I'm sure, that are going to be led. I think the Biden administration has been pretty straight up honest about what the situation has been. So I hope that continues. The facts are, and I think Al is quite right, the facts are that just like every president, there are rarely slow weeks, and he steps right into dealing with the tragic results of a hurricane. There's massive fires in California that are capturing a lot of people's attention, my home state. He has a budget bill, he has the infrastructure legislation, a debt ceiling, all coming at him in September. And most voters, months from now, 60 some days from now, are going to be asking, what is the Biden administration doing on issues that affect me? And whether we like it or not, foreign policy tends to take a back seat in something like that, unless there's another war, another military action, or a terrorist incident. By the way, that's entirely possible. So I think that over time, on this one, Biden will probably be judged more favorably for having gotten us out, and for redeploying massive sums of money against infrastructure issues and other social issues here in this country. And I haven't even mentioned COVID, and that's going to loom large in people's mind for a while. So those are the kinds of things I think people will dwell on. I do think that we should take time, policymakers should take time to really think through what happened over the 20 years, to begin to address what kind of an approach is reasonable should we face situations again where we have a need to, or a perceived need to enter a country. I think in many ways the formula is much the same. First of all, you need a very clear mission, you need overwhelming force, and you need to carry public opinion with you so that you maintain popular support for your actions. And I would think, or particularly over the next several years, the American people are going to be very restless, very worried about any action that puts Americans on foreign soil in a military conflict. Over time, we tend to forget some of the kinds of lessons we learned in Vietnam. And we enter these countries without the clear mission and without purpose, and we begin to lose public support. And there's a reason why no president got out of there in 20 years. It's getting out of a situation like that is one risky political action to take. Biden was willing to take it. He deserves credit for it. He will pay some price for the way in which it worked out. But I actually think that his fate, the fate of midterm elections, is going to rest more on some of these other issues and less on Afghanistan than some might think it does today.
When I think about this for the long term, I can't help but think that some Americans will worry that our power has diminished at a time when China has increased its presence, and places like Taiwan and Hong Kong are feeling vulnerable. How do you capture all that into a future for both the Democratic and Republican
If
Party?
you're coming to me on that, I think that this gets into that discussion that we have from time to time in this country about fighting the last war. We have an unbelievable military, and the men and women in the military are by far and away the best in the world, and they're heroes. We train them well, we equip them well, and we send them into conflicts. But the nature of conflict is changing so dramatically. We're not fighting a foreign power. We don't have a head of state that we have to negotiate with. And so we must get better. Our intelligence community must get better. We must get better in looking ahead at the nature of conflict and not so much resting on our ability to be successful in past conflicts. So I can only say that I think that there's good reason not to doubt our ability, but I think there's really an important debate and discussion that has to go on about strategically how we should be approaching conflicts around the world and just what it's going to take to be effective. And I will say, that one of the lessons that I think President George Herbert Walker Bush taught us was the absolute necessity for broad-based coalitions. Going it alone is not a great sense of strength. Putting it together a coalition and having the world share in something that's important and with purpose is really the sign of great leadership. And that's why he was so successful in basing American troops in the Gulf states to get Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait. But he also knew that coalition was only going to hold together for a stated purpose, and that being too aggressive and trying to move militarily into Baghdad at that point would have broken the coalition and was not consistent with the mission. And so I do think that our strategy has to rely upon the diplomatic capabilities of our country, which probably also have to get a little better if the truth be known.
Al, you have the last word this time.
Points. The next war with China may very well be economic. And if this economy really comes back and it's firing and people are doing well, The fear of, in the 80s, we feared Japan. Now I think a lot of people fear China as the economic monster that's going to bring us down. If our economy is going well, I think a lot of the threat of China will be put in a very different framework. The same thing that Craig said is really important. Clarity of purpose when you're going to intervene in any kind of a conflict. We had that clarity of purpose when we went into Afghanistan, but over 20 years it waned. And one of the things I learned, just even managing an organization, it's hard to shift your purpose and maintain support. And to also continue to have the focus to do the job well. And I think, as Craig has said, we're going to have a lot of investigations, and most of the mistakes that are probably going to come out in Afghanistan were not Biden's. He hadn't been around there very long. When you think about using our military and our diplomatic power and sort of not getting in over our heads, or think about things like, Bosnia may turn out to be a model in the Clinton administration. But basically, the most important point is you got to fight the next war, and we didn't learn our lessons well enough from Vietnam, and I hope we do out of Afghanistan.
Al Fromm, Craig Fuller, thanks so much. We'll see you next time.